Well, let me take you to page 150. If you look at A, B, C, and D, though we'll run through it quickly in many ways, this is a great page to summarize everything we've covered. If you want to mark that even somewhere, A, B, C, and D do a great job of sort of covering everything we've tried to communicate over these days. Understanding is expressed in experience where there's genuine communication. That's a point we have been making. You must learn to communicate and to live with the tension that it's difficult to communicate, in part because the gender differences, in part because of our own personalities. Certainly the most central reason why it's difficult to communicate is that we're both selfish people and we're not fully, completely redeemed, and given that, we'll struggle. B, sexual intimacy is experienced when a couple balances companionship, commitment, and passion as God has designed it. Resolving conflict is enjoyed when each spouse chooses to respond in controlling anger as God has empowered us. We're going to struggle with anger. It's going to be there in our marriages. You ought not be surprised that there are tensions and conflict between you. But now what do you do with it? Do you just pretend it's not there, stuff it, and hope to go on with it? Or do you open the door for dialogue, for being able to at least own it to yourself and bring it to God, to begin that struggle with Him? And then, when your heart has softened, where you're not making accusations, beginning then the process of putting words to one another. D, the power of blessing. And this is what we'll be spending our time on. The power of blessing replaces insults when a person entrusts himself to God as God has modeled for us. One of the comments that you may have heard and remembered me saying at the very beginning, and that is, contempt kills marriages. If there is ever but one thing you remember of my part in this conference, it is that phrase: contempt will kill a marriage. It is the acid, it is the cancer, and in many ways the antidote to the cancer of contempt is in many ways the blessing of a heart that gives to the other what indeed we most need, and that is the enjoyment of love and the call of respect. Now what I want to spend our time is what is involved in giving a blessing. Let me give you a context for the material that I want to think through. This was on a Saturday morning. I don't know about you, but Saturday mornings are holy mornings for me. Those are the times where at least the first couple hours of the day, I want a cup of coffee, I want my morning paper, and I don't really read the paper. I do read it, but I don't read it. Do you understand what I mean by that? And that is, I sort of gaze over the words. And what I'm really doing is I'm sort of making my way into the day through the paper. And I may remember something, but for the most part, I'm drinking coffee, just waking up. It was one of those early, beautiful Colorado mornings. Blue sky, just a gorgeous day. I had my coffee, I had my paper, and my daughter, my oldest daughter, came to my little area where I study, what I call my library. She came to the library and she said, "Do you have 5 minutes?" And I said, "Sure, come on in." She said, No. I want to know, do you have 5 minutes? And I said, "Yeah. I just said I did. Come on in." She said, "No, you don't understand. I'm asking for 5 minutes where you don't say a word." Now, I don't know what you'd be thinking. She's 17 years of age at this time, and I've got all of a sudden all sorts of... I mean, in a millisecond, I have gone from, well, I won't even put words to it. It's just gone from benign to tragic. And it's like, well, yes, sit down. Please sit down. She said, 5 minutes, you won't say a word. I said, I promise I will not speak. She sat down. She said, "Dad, 3 friends and I this afternoon are planning to go and have our navels pierced. I want your permission and your blessing." Four minutes and 45 seconds later, that's what it took her, about 10, 15 seconds to say it. I'd promised for 5 minutes. So zipped, 5 minutes. sort of sitting there. I wanted to prick my paper back up, but so we're looking at one another. I'm looking out the window. I'm uncomfortable for about 5 minutes, but I'm also aware that the question she asked produced such initial rage that the 5 minutes were brilliant on her part. So 5 minutes finished, and I looked at her and I said, so you'd like an answer? Yes, I'd like an answer. And I said, how would you like it? Would you like it more deductively, that is, going through reasons, sort of a thoughtful progress to get to an answer, or do you want it more inductively, and that is the answer and then all the reasons? And she said, well, I'd like it inductively, or deductively. And I said, no, you can't have it inductively. No, and the answer is no. No, over my dead, fat, bloated body, you're not going to have. She goes, well, I figure you'd say that, so I'd like to now at least hear your explanation. And I said, well, it's very simple. It's not biblical. And she said, well, Dad, I've thought about that as well, and so what I've done is I've gone through your concordance on your computer to check up every verse on pierce or piercing, and the only thing I found is a passage in the Old Testament that indicates that if a slave wished to remain slave, even though he could become a free man, he would pierce his ear as a sign of loyalty to his master. And so she said, it actually looks like it's sort of like an indication of faithfulness. I said, well, that was that day. She said, well, Dad, are there any other reasons? And I said to her, well, I think it's a sign of rebellion. She said, well, Dad, you've always taught me to read the Bible in context. You've always said that a Bible passage taken out of context is a pretext. I said, well, yeah, that's very good. That's very well said. She said, then I'd like you to read my life. I want you to look at my life and see if you see any other signs of rebellion. So I said, what do you mean? She said, well, do you see rebellion in my dating? Do you see rebellion in the way I use money? Do you see rebellion in the way I drive my car? Do you see rebellion in my friendships? Do you see rebellion in terms of how I deal with our church, with ministry, with the mission trip just last month? I said, well, no, I don't. You're doing well. You're living well. She said, well then, Dad, you're taking one spot, one point out of context, aren't you? Isn't that a pretext for you? I said to her, look. It may just be, but let's boil it down to this. I'm the father and you're not. And as long as you're living under my roof, you're not going to have a pierced belly button. She sat up, she stood up, and she looked at me, and she pointed her finger at me. That may have been her first significant flaw. She pointed her finger at me, and she said, well, let me tell you one thing. Your wife has a different view of this. She walks out, and at that point, my Saturday has been ruined. So I went down and I went to find Becky. Becky, where are you, dear? So I went and found her and we began this conversation. I said, I understand we have different views on piercing. Not that my wife and I had ever had this major conversation on piercing in our home prior to this, but I said, what in the world did you tell her? Well, at that point, let me tell you, this becomes relevant. When you've got an angry husband, how do you bless him? When you've got a moment of tension, how do you bless? What does it mean to bless? If blessing can't be done then in one sense, what I'm trying to get toward is that it probably won't be done when it's most meaningful. So I want to begin using that as a context to move through this, and I'll come back and finish the story. Giving a blessing begins with cultivating a new attitude towards your mate. Next page. To sum up all, be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit. 1 Peter 3:8. What I want you to do is just look at those words. We're going to pass through them quickly, but notice harmony. If I give you the antonym, it'll give you a picture of the opposite. So look at the word harmony and then tie it to the word noise. Most of us are noisy people, and the minute of conflict, we just get noisy. And the opposite of noise in this sense isn't silence, but is harmony. And that is multiple voices, some which bring discord, and yet the discord is then woven into a larger symphonic whole that is beautiful. In many ways, it's like jazz. Jazz has a certain syncopation. It has a certain degree of chaos to it. And yet, if you have ears to hear, the jazz has an order and a beauty that is just compelling. No matter what music you listen to, it is music that brings discord into harmony. And therefore, don't ever think agreement is necessary to bless. Agreement is never necessary to bless. You don't have to agree to bless another person. Sympathy. The opposite of that is self-absorption. Sympathy. The word empathy is another word that's parallel. Pathos. Em means in. Pathos means suffering. Do I suffer for you? The opposite of suffering for you is my own personal self-absorption. What I'm getting at is, as long as you're noisy, you cannot bless. As long as you're self-absorbed, you cannot bless. Third word, brotherliness. The opposite of that is the word division. And in many ways, the notion of a division is, I put a line between us. Here's a line. Until you cross from that line, I will not be with you. You are my enemy. And so brotherliness, if you want to put the phrase, it's the phrase, you are not my enemy. Even when you're hurting me, you aren't my enemy. Even when you think you're my enemy, you're not my real enemy. I have a far greater enemy working to divide us. Fourth word, kind-heartedness. Really, the opposite of that is the word contempt again. You can't speak blessing if your heart is mired in contempt. If there's something in you that basically is going, I'm going to make you pay. I'm going to hurt you like you've hurt me. You cannot bless. Final word, humility. The opposite of that is the word demand. And when I'm demanding you be different, and if you won't be different, I won't give my heart to you. Those are the moments where I'm saying that's the context where if you are any of those, noisy, self-absorbed, divisive, contemptuous, demanding, I don't care if you speak wonderful words. Oh, honey, I just think you're so wonderful. And the real motive underneath that is you're hoping that your spouse will do what you want, then your words are not a blessing. It's in the context when you are indeed being challenged, threatened, when you feel that your desires are being shaken and you feel empty and perhaps afraid. That's the context where our heart must go back to our power source, and that is relationship with Jesus Christ. Next page. The scripture contrasts two kinds of marriage relationships. Not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving blessing instead. A, the insult for insult relationship. That's what many couples are caught in, the insult for insult relationship. This is defined as meaning to hurt by action or word. I know it's a longer phrase than you're used to, but meaning to hurt by action or word. And this relationship is rooted in unforgiving and a hardened heart. And the insult for insult relationship has its focus on my rights and my feelings. It's illustrated by the behavior of hiding and hurling. And I can tell you what happened, at least initially, with regard to my reaction to Becky when she said, I'm sorry that you're upset, but I did tell Annie this. She said these words, I told Annie I have no trouble if she gets her navel pierced. I think it's just a cultural issue, not a whole lot different than having an ear pierced. On the other hand, I made it very clear to our daughter that you would be the one who would make the final decision. And that if your decision was different than mine, it's not that I'm right and you're wrong. I'm willing to go along with whatever direction you choose. Nonetheless, she needed to know my viewpoint on this. I wasn't going to protect you, and I wasn't going to protect her with regard to what it is that I have a conviction about. So she handled herself brilliantly well, kindly, very strong. And at that point in time, I looked at her and I said these words, "You set me up to have conflict with my daughter. And I was having a nice day and I'm returning to it." So that was a pretty good indication of hurling and hiding. I tend to hurl and hide. You may be hiding and hurling, but I'm telling you, whichever you do first, I promise you'll do the second later. And so, because I hurled then I hid, I went back up to my little library, and at that time I was working on a book called Intimate Allies. A book that at that moment as I was writing, I began to produce things that were just not good, not true, not helpful, even just poor writing. Why? I was just filled with anger. And so, in that sense, had my wife blessed me, the first major blessing, there's always a blessing when you tell the truth. I want you to make sure you hear that. There's always a blessing to the other when you tell the truth. But I want you to hear it's more than telling the truth, because you can tell the truth not in love. You can tell the truth in a way in which the truth becomes a baseball bat that floors the other person. Indeed, that is not blessing. But truth is always part of blessing. And if you think you have to twist the truth, hide the truth, ignore the truth in blessing, then indeed you don't have a biblical understanding of the call of words to mean something to another human being. Many times we say things to people and we don't mean it. Remember one of the days that my daughter, my oldest, was about 14. She came downstairs and she had what I want to call a honking pimple. You know what I mean by that? I mean, it was a pimple that doubled the size of her nose. And she looked at me and she said, "I can't go to school today." And I looked at her and I said, "Why?" And she said, "Can't you see it?" And I said to her, "Actually, I can hardly see anything but it." Careful, careful. Are you honest in your interactions? Do you know what many parents would say? You know what my mother would have said to me? "Oh, nobody will notice. You can't even see it." It's like, don't lie to bless. Never lie to bless, because people can see through that lie in a second. And what I said to her was, you are going to have a hard day. In fact, I imagine you will have comments made to you every 10 steps you walk through the building. She's looking at me and she's furious. And I said to her, you really have two choices. My recommendation, she goes, "You mean I can stay home?" And I said, "Oh no, that's not one of the choices. The choice is put a bag over your head and cut holes in it. Or walk into your school with the knowledge that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior, and He can bear on your behalf whatever shame you feel. You make the decision, but I know your heart and I know what you want to live." Now, is that not a blessing? You think I'm being nice by telling her, "Oh, nobody can see it, put a little makeup on it." No, if she had put makeup on it, it would have made Tammy Faye look good. So don't lie to make a point. Don't deceive in order to make a point. My task, when I bless, is to tell the truth. And in many ways, what I was doing with my daughter was inviting her to face what she was going to face that day, and doing it in a way that in many ways I was complimenting what I know to be most true about her heart, and that is her heart really knows Jesus Christ, and her heart really longs to serve Him. And yes, pimples are there. And she asked me a dozen questions from that point on. She said, "What was it like when you had pimples like this?" I said, "I didn't go to school." Are you serious? You think I'd go to school looking like you? I'm telling you. And then, she again has that look in her eye like, "What?" And I said, "Do you understand, when I was your age, I didn't have a 50th of the courage you have. I didn't have a 50th of the sense of self-identity you have. I didn't have a 50th of the confidence to be able to live as well as you do. So I was a coward, honey. I'm calling you to be, and you already know that you're a courageous young woman. Now go off. If you need a bag, call me. Now, you may differ, and you may say that's just, it's inappropriate to be talking. Your daughter felt shame. All I can tell you is I don't think so. I think she felt blessed by that interaction. So now, what is the task? It is defined, next page, a blessing for insult, responding kindly when offended. It is defined as a blessing for insult is responding kindly when offended. If the core killer of marriage indeed is contempt, I don't know if I've been as honest as I could be, and that is to say, I think the real core killer of all marriages is self-righteousness. Where does contempt come from? Contempt for you, or even contempt for myself. At some level, it is my own self-righteousness. And what do I mean by self-righteousness? Really what I mean by that is using my condition to justify myself. And whatever condition that is, the condition of I worked 70 hours this week, somebody ought to give me a break. That's self-righteousness. Or I've tried so hard to love you and you don't receive anything from me. So I deserve not to be hurt the way you're hurting me. That's self-righteousness. Self-righteousness can even be along the lines of, I was abused 30 years ago. How can you dare ask me to love my spouse when I've been as hurt as I have been? Do you see, self-righteousness is using our past to justify our present. It's using our wounds or using our efforts to do good as a basis of self-justification. And so the dilemma, if you'll hear the problem, it's never the insult that's the problem. We think the problem is the insult being given to us. Therefore, the change that must occur is, you stop insulting me. That's never true. The bottom line is it's not the insult that's the problem, it's my own self-righteous heart that's the problem. And so if my daughter looks at me and says, I think you're an idiot, it's not her disrespect that's the problem. Yes, she has a problem, and it needs to be addressed. But if I get defensive, and defensiveness is always a flight from God. Simply leave that in your notes somewhere. Defensiveness is always a flight from God. And that's why point number 2, the relationship must be based on an attitude of forgiveness. And I take you back to a gorgeous phrase that I would, if I could have tattooed along with a belly button ring for you, it would be this one. 7:47, Luke 7:47. He who is forgiven much loves much. The implication is he who is forgiven little loves little. Are you forgiven much? So when somebody attacks you, are you more aware of what you've been forgiven of, or are you more aware of how you are hurting? Depending on those two issues will be whether or not you can bless the person who's hurting you. Are you more aware of what you've been forgiven for, or are you more aware of how you've been hurt? If it's more aware of how you've been hurt, I almost always will say you'll respond with something other than blessing. The blessing for insult relationship has its focus on God and the promises of His Word. Point 3. It is illustrated by the behavior of responding with forgiveness and not reacting in anger. In many ways, what my wife did is that about an hour later, she let me stew in my juices for a time. She came up to my office and she said, I've made some more coffee. Would you like some? In many ways, what she was doing was true to Romans chapter 12. For those who have offended you, get them something to drink, get them something to eat. Literally, she was feeding me. Now, whether you mean that literally, and many times literally, it means go give them what their body needs. But beyond the literal, it also means give them what their whole being needs. And what do people need desperately? Two things, always. We've been putting words to this all weekend long. People long to be loved. And people long to be respected. And what my wife did when she came up and she heard me grouse at her and say, I'm not hungry, I'm not thirsty. She said, well, I'll leave you a cup. And if you want it, it'll be right here. And then she looked at me and she said, I know you're angry, and you're angry at me, you're angry at your daughter. But all I can tell you is, I know you're a better man than how you're living now. And when you choose to respond well, we'll have a wonderful day. She walked away. And at that point, I can't tell you, my anger went away. And indeed, intensified. Let me put words to, though, what I think to be the essence of blessing. It is calling forth what redemption is already. It is calling forth what redemption is already in the other person. And even if they're an unbeliever, they're still made in the image of God. And you can always bless the image of God in that person. There's always something you can say to that person that envisions for them what it is they were meant to be. You can bless who they are, and you can bless who they are meant to become. And it's being put in that position of saying, I know you're a better man. Do you understand that's sort of like a double, shall we say, a double-edged compliment? What she's saying is, I know your heart, and I also know your heart. I know your heart in terms of what you really want, and I know your heart as to how you're acting right now. I won't deny both realities. I'm calling you to be who you are, and in many ways to call you to be who you're not. And yet, at that moment, her face is kind. She's not attacking. There's not a look of, I know you're a better man than this, so why don't you shape up? Do you hear that one point we came back to, and that is no demands, no contempt, no noise, no self-righteousness, simply the opportunity to say, I know what kind of person you indeed are meant to be. And therefore, we're illustrating what forgiveness looks like. Point number 5, all of God's power is available to me when I entrust myself to the Father. I don't know if there's anything that we're meant to, in one sense, risk more than that. Indeed, will He come through for me? When I take the risk of moving in the direction that God desires, will He empower me with His Spirit? He certainly won't give me all I need to live well. He'll simply give me all I need now to make the next step. Many times we pray for God's empowerment, but what we're really asking for is, give me the power to make it through the exit sign. And really what God's saying is, no, I'm not going to give you that power. I'm not going to give you the power to get there. I'll give you the power to take 1 or 2 steps. But then when you take 1 or 2 steps, you still require more faith to take the next step and the next step. Nothing matters to God more than He makes His place in us. He longs to dwell in your very body. And are you willing to receive His power for whatever step it is He's called you to? For some of you, it really is little more than being able to say to your spouse, I don't know if I've ever blessed you. The way He's begun to talk about it, that is to not just find something positive like, at least you do eggs well. Do you understand how mean that is? And that's not the same thing I was saying when I talked about what my wife did. That's not blessing. That's really a curse. The blessing is, I see who you are, and I see who you are meant to be, and I can put words to that. Let me begin to put words to the 3 benefits of blessing. Next page. For you were called for the very purpose that you might inherit a blessing. For let him who means to love life and use good days refrain his tongue from evil, and his lips from speaking guile. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and His ears attend to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. 3 categories. You will inherit, first of all, a blessing. You will have a full life. And you will learn what it means to walk with God. For you've been called for this purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving an example for you to follow in His steps, who committed no sin, nor was there any deceit found in His mouth. Let me see if I can bring much of this back together. After my wife left, I had another hour or so to think, to just sort of ruminate on what she said. And indeed, the Spirit of God used my wife's words to draw me out of my cave and at least go to both my daughter and my wife and to say, I was wrong. I was wrong with how I addressed you. I have still not made the decision, but I know that I can't even come close to making a godly decision until at least I deal with the fact that I failed you in terms of my anger toward you and my anger toward my wife. As I began to address that, I went back and began praying. And as I began to think about what the issues were in terms of a pierced belly button, what it really boiled down to, and I'm cutting it to the chase, is that we were in a great church, very conservative, wonderful church in Denver. And what began to dawn on me was if my daughter had her navel pierced, there were other kids in the youth group who might hear of that and indeed might take it back to their parents and then indeed begin to affect me and my reputation. And I began to ponder, what was the real issue? Did I really have trouble with her belly button being pierced? And the answer was, not really. I thought it was stupid, but nonetheless, didn't think it was a big deal. But what was the big deal? My own shame was the big deal. And as the Spirit of God began to, shall we say, converse with me, I went to my daughter and I said this, honey, there are certain situations where I can give you my permission, I can't give you my blessing. And you as a young woman need to know the difference between receiving my permission and making decisions. Sometimes against my blessing, against the desires I really have for you, but they're not moral decisions, but they may reflect other issues. And so this is what I'm telling you. If you wish to have your navel pierced, you may do so. Here's my promise. I will not use it against you. I will not turn against you. I'll not harden my heart against you. And if I do, that is solely my problem. And we talked, we prayed, and I said, you're free to go. That afternoon, she had her navel pierced. She told me, and I won't deny the fact, I was heartbroken. It took me a couple days, we dealt well with it. About a month or two later, I didn't even see it. I didn't see it for 2 months. She came up the stairs one day with her navel showing, and I saw it for the first time, and I sort of went, that's what I got upset about? And I said, it looks weird, but nice. 2 months later, I bought her a navel ring for her birthday. 6 months after that, I saw her in a bathing suit, and she didn't have her navel ring in. And I said, where's your navel ring? Where's the one I bought you? She said, I threw it away. I said, it didn't cost that much, but you threw it away? What? She said, I don't know, Dad, what was going through my head, but bottom line, it was uncomfortable. I didn't like wearing it. And when you finally approved of it, I found it had no more interest for me. And then my daughter gave me an extraordinarily sweet blessing. What she said was, Dad, a lot of times I differ with you, but this is what I know about you. You'll hang in there with me so that we have a chance to keep our relationship growing together. Thank you for not making it the big deal that you started out to make it. That was a blessing. What she's saying is, I know who you are. I know who you are, and I see the work of God. That's what blessing is about. It's not just saying to your spouse, hey, I like that haircut. Looks nice. That's wonderful. That's a compliment. It's not a blessing. A blessing is being able to reach into the soul of the other person and to say, this is where I see God working in you, and it's beautiful. And I long to see more, but I'm thrilled with what is there. That's the complexity of a blessing. I enjoy what is there, I look forward to the more, but I don't demand it, and I enjoy it. Now, if you bless one another in that direction, all I can tell you is you will refrain your tongue from evil, you will turn from evil, you will do good, you will be a peacemaker and not a troublemaker. Final summary, why don't you look at that? It basically boils down to this. Your relationship will grow in the soil of honor. It will grow with the blessing of the reign of God, and the fruit you'll taste simply a year from now, folks. If you begin to move toward blessing, if we had the privilege to be back together a year from now, you would be telling us, you'd be telling one another of the incredible fruit that has come from using your words to call forth that which is of God in each of our souls.
That was Family Life Weekend to Remember conference speaker Dan Allender on resolving conflict through the power of blessing. On the next CD, we'll hear from Crawford Loritz on leaving a legacy of destiny.